So for today's video, I want to talk a little bit about the Xbox One, the very last console that I will ever have, because at this rate, console gaming is pretty much worthless. There's no point in having a console in 2021. It's very antiquated. PC gaming is the way to go. Console gaming has nothing to offer anymore. And I started to realize that in the last generation of consoles, the PS4 and especially the Xbox One. It helped me really gravitate towards PC gaming. I'm going to talk about that in this video. But yeah, it's been 6 years. 6 years since I got my Xbox One, May 2015. It was a birthday gift for my 17th birthday. It's crazy to think I was 17 6 years ago. It feels like I just turned 17. Yeah, time flies. It's just insane how that happens. But yeah, you know, the funny thing is, in hindsight, I really regret getting the Xbox One because it really didn't offer much of value to me. I've had it for 6 years, and I never really felt like it was a worthwhile experience having the Xbox One, because the games were shit. The first-party titles were not very good. You had Crackdown 3, State of Decay, even Halo. That's like the flagship franchise from Microsoft, and even Halo was garbage. Yeah, I think the Xbox One is definitely one of the most pathetic first-party libraries I've ever seen in a video game console. Not counting, like, the really bad ones, obviously, like the Wii U, but it's still pretty bad. Like, it's definitely the worst performance that Microsoft has ever made with a video game console. The original Xbox was great. The Xbox 360 was fucking legendary, but the Xbox One just didn't really hold up. It didn't do anything special. It was just there, you know what I mean? Like, it just didn't really have any excitement to it. There were a few things. There was backwards compatibility, and that's the funny thing about my experience with the Xbox One. I spent more time playing Xbox 360 games on my Xbox One than actual new games that came out in the 8th generation for the Xbox One. That might have to do with a lot of me just being so disconnected from the modern gaming experience and just not really liking the way that video games are today in the current generation or even in the 8th generation, whatever. I thought gaming was a lot more enjoyable in the 7th gen, so I did buy a lot of games for the 7th gen during that time period, like Dragon Age Origins, which is probably my most played game on the Xbox One, next to Fallout 4. I also picked up Mass Effect on the Xbox One. I picked up a lot of backwards compatible games that I never actually played back when they came out, and I had a really good time, but it's kind of like, okay, I could have just stuck with my 360, right? What was the point of me getting this fucking console? I mean, it was at the point where the Kinect was no longer bundled with the Xbox One, so it was $100 cheaper. I think it actually dropped down to $350 because it started off at $400 without the Kinect, then it was $50 cheaper. I'm like, oh, $350. It seems like a good birthday gift for me. I asked my parents if they could get me an Xbox One. They did. Man, if hindsight is 2020, I would have just got a gaming PC at that point, and the whole trajectory of my YouTube career would have been so different because I wouldn't have been a console fanboy. I wouldn't have made all those cringe videos back then, and Rags probably never would have had a YouTube channel because I inspired him to start YouTube, and the first video that Rags made was on me. And that awful video, how to win a PC versus console debate. Oh man, good times. Imagine though, imagine if instead of an Xbox One, I got a gaming PC instead. The world would have been a much different place. I was actually thinking about also getting a PC, but for some reason I just went with the Xbox One because I guess I was used to the console experience, and that was just something that I was used to for so long. Like, I got the PlayStation, but I also had an Xbox. That's what I did in the 7th gen. I had a PS3 and a 360, and in the 6th generation, I only had a PS2, but that's also because I was too young and I didn't, like, really know a lot about video games. I was just getting started with gaming, but I had all the handhelds. I would always try to get all the gaming systems that I could possibly get my hands on, so I guess picking up the Xbox One was just me trying to continue that tradition, but I don't really remember a game that was on there that I'm like, I have to buy the console for this one game, because, like I said, the entire life cycle of the Xbox One, you didn't have that one game that, like, oh, you had to have an Xbox One, because if you didn't, you were missing out on an amazing experience. Just, like, no, most of the game library was mediocre as hell on the Xbox One. The only really good one I can think of is Sunset Overdrive, but that's, like, one game out of however many games that we had on the Xbox One that were first party. And, of course, they eventually just came to PC anyway, So that was another thing that's like, wow, like really, why did I buy this thing if all the games are going to be on PC regardless? Should have just gotten a fucking PC. So I definitely felt robbed picking up the Xbox One. It just didn't seem like a good value. I never really got my money's worth. I'm using it a lot to play Call of Duty on the 360 for my COD channel, but I mean, like I said, I could have just done that on an actual Xbox 360. I still had my 360. I should have just stuck with it. I mean, like I said, I should have just gotten a PC to begin with. It just would have been so much easier. It would have been so much better. And, it is what it is, but I still regret picking up the Xbox One. And my negative experience with that console convinced me to never touch a console again, because it pushed me to get into PC gaming, and since then, I've never looked back, and I never will. But I guess we'll see with the Series X how Microsoft does this generation. I know they're pushing Game Pass and everything. We'll see how that goes, but it seems like Microsoft is in a worse position than they were last generation, because Sony they're kicking their ass. Like, it's like Microsoft never learned from how awful the Xbox One was. It seems like they're just repeating all the same mistakes and they're doubling down. So I don't know. We'll see how this generation goes, but so far it seems very one-sided. I'm curious to see what Halo Infinite's gonna be like. It's supposed to come out at the end of the year. It got delayed. It was like the first game that Microsoft really delayed. They should have delayed the Master Chief Collection, because that was the game that came bundled with my Xbox One, and it was an unplayable mess back in 2015, and it was still that way for years. So yeah, it definitely, that wasn't a good first impression that I had with the Xbox One, was how broken Halo was, and Halo was like the bread and butter of the Xbox brand. I want to see Microsoft get better, I really do, but my hopes are not very high at the moment. But regardless, even if the Xbox Series X has an amazing game library, even if it's a lot better than what the Xbox One had, all those games are coming to PC anyway, so I literally have no reason to buy a console ever again. So the Xbox One is most likely the last console that I will ever own.